Hi, my name is Taylor Frederick. The theme that I chose is teaching subject matter. My competency statement: I am competent at integrating hands-on activities during mathematics to increase student engagement that leads to student learning and better understanding. The guiding questions that I had to help me follow through with this capstone: how should subject matter be organized to enable students to learn it most effectively? In what ways or through what strategies can a teacher represent content subject matter for all students? And then, how do students learn within a particular subject matter? Now, my first piece of evidence, this comes from my time teaching at Roper Elementary. I taught second grade. It was during my math block. The lessons that I taught, they weren't really interactive at all. A lot of them were on a PowerPoint. I was just giving examples and then sending students back to do practice problems. And I noticed that's not really how a lot of my students were learning. They really needed more of an interactive visual engagement. Doing practice problems, I had a lot of students, especially when we were working with hidden numbers, they just weren't grasping that concept at all. So for example, I had a student who kept confusing a pair and double. So when I pulled him aside and I pulled out manipulatives and I showed him, now a pair is 2. Now if you're doubling the amount, it's that number plus itself. So you're gonna have 4. So 2 plus 2 is 4. So that piece of evidence there shows my growth, because I've noticed during that time, I can't just stand there with a PowerPoint, go through examples and give out practice problems. I need my students to be engaged. I need them to have time to explore, interact with things, and not just practice solving story problems with hidden numbers when they haven't seen that concept. Going on to my second piece of evidence, this is my time student teaching at Everett Elementary, where I'm at currently. We were working on comparing groups of objects, and most of it were with workbook pages right here. Students would have to count out how many objects were in one row, write the number, count out the objects in the second row, write the number, then compare them by drawing lines, and then circle the extra. I noticed after going through a few examples in that workbook page, a lot of them were really confused on exactly what they were supposed to be doing, even though we did examples together. They were still writing 3 and 3, so they would only write what was matched, but they wouldn't take into consideration the extra, or that first row of objects had 5. So when it came to the second day of teaching this lesson, I decided, how can I make this more interactive? What can I do with manipulatives? So if I did manipulatives, I could have bins at each pod, then have students pull out 5 objects, so like maybe the colored bears, and have 5 in a row, and then 3 objects, like maybe 3 bears, and put it underneath it. And then they would have to compare which one's greater, which one's less, and then move the extras to the side. Or knowing my students, they're very talkative and they like to move around. So I'm like, what can I do with movement? So thinking about my time in health and wellness, I decided, well, what if I compared not just objects, but what if I compared students? So I had my students come up based on like their hair, how they wore it that day, or their shoes, or their shirt. So I would have 5 students with long sleeve shirts stand up across the front of the room. And then I would have like 3 students with short sleeve shirts stand up across the room. And then the rest of the class that was left had to tell me which group is greater, which group is less, and then they would have to match, and then the extra would either stand off to the side, or I'd kind of have my arms around them to mimic what they did on the workbook page. In doing that, a lot of my students were able to grasp that concept more. When we did the workbook page the following day, they actually were doing exactly what they were supposed to be doing. They were able to identify which one was greater, which one was less. They counted out each object in each row. Exactly, and not just taking into consideration the objects that matched. Moving into my third piece of evidence, this also is my time at Everett Elementary. We were working with 3D shapes, and the curriculum called for just holding up the objects and talking about the attributes. And again, knowing my students, they weren't gonna grasp if I just stood there and I asked them to tell me, how many sides does this object have? Can I stack it? Can I roll it? I wanted to physically show them, and I wanted them to have time to explore and interact with the objects as well. So what I did, I just had my students sit all around the carpet. I put the objects in the middle, and we pulled them out one at a time. And then they would have to tell me, this has so many sides. Yes, I can stack it. Let me show you. Or yes, it can roll, and they would roll it across the carpet to another friend. And then they'd have to tell me the name. When it came to the name, I didn't want just one person shouting it out. I would have them whisper in their hands, and they'd have to whisper out loud to me. So I would hear every single one of them say the name of that object so they know they knew it. And then once we finished with, for example, the sphere, I would have them stand up, go move around the room, and show me where that sphere is at in our classroom. Bring it to me or point to it if you can't move it. A lot of them pointed to the globe, which is okay. And then like when it came to the cone, a lot of students got confused with our little toy house. The top of it is a pyramid. So they were telling me that the pyramid was a cone. I'm like, well, the pyramid has more sides, so that wouldn't be a cone, and a pyramid can't roll. Whereas the cone can roll, it rolls in a circle, and it only has one side. So going back to my competency statement, I was able to determine that my kids understand. They can tell me what is a 3D shape, what is not a 3D shape, and they can identify them by their names. Moving on to my synthesis, learning becomes more engaging. I'm not just standing up there, I'm not just telling them what to do, I'm not just going through examples, they're actually getting up, they're moving around, they're learning the content more just one-on-one by exploring. It's beneficial for all students, so it doesn't matter if you're a higher achieving student or lower achieving student, just having that time to explore is going to give you a better understanding whether or not you get it fully right away or not. And then it's adjustable to all students' needs. So again, if a student's not grasping that concept right away, even if you're doing a movement activity, you can still adjust it to meet their needs by time like the next lesson, or maybe they need it one-on-one. So moving on to my reflection, my time here at the Teacher College, I've learned a lot about myself, not just as an educator, but also as a learner. I've been able to think of ways that I can approach a concept, how I'd want to teach it, then also how maybe I might learn from that concept myself. Again, I am competent in integrating hands-on activities during mathematics to increase student engagement that lead to learning and a better understanding. I seek out where in lessons that I can add manipulatives and movements. I'm not just looking to follow the curriculum. I want to add in what I know is going to benefit my students. And then there are times that I know it's not going to be the most effective. If my students are too rowdy that day, or if we don't have a lot of time, then it's not going to be worth it to try and push an activity with movement or manipulatives when I know it's going to take a little bit longer. And then as far as any limitations, I don't want it to leave it just in the mathematic content area. I want to find ways to integrate it and move it on to different subjects. So finding other ways in maybe writing or reading or like unit studies. I want them to be able to interact, move around, explore, and not just, again, just be sitting there being talked to. And then finally, for the future, I want to be able to collaborate with teammates and other supporting coworkers, have some time to maybe go in and observe what they're doing in their classroom. If they're trying a movement activity that I want to try out, I want to be able to go in and observe it be done and maybe see if I can implement it that way or if I need to tweak it to fit me, so my students have that opportunity as well to have that engaging activity. And then to continue attending professional developments and offered seminars that are available, learning from others and seeing what research has backed up to prove to work. And then also just learning a new curriculum. I did get a job within a different district, and so it is a whole different curriculum. So now I need to learn that curriculum and see where in there can I implement my movement activities that I've done before that I know work, and where can I fit in new ones. And then also just being a continuous learner. I want to further my education, at some point get my master's in something that interests me. So.